What's up everyone, Jay's 2 cents here. We're gonna take a look at Antec's new flagship PC. They reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in taking a look at one and doing a video for them. So I thought absolutely, because I am a huge Antec fan from the past. One of my favorite builds that I ever did was back in my Antec P182, where I customized the top to put a radiator on it and made some custom airflow through the case and really got comfortable with my Dremel. And then also my Antec 900 case, which was one of the most awesome airflow cases at the time. And then Antec kind of went quiet for a while. And then just recently we started kind of really taking a look at what they've got again. And I'm really excited to show you guys the new FLUX Pro. It kind of feels like they've taken everything from the past that I loved about their original full tower cases and really just modernized it for today's hardcore like hardware and stuff. So huge thanks to Antec for sponsoring today's video for me to do a build in this case and show you guys what it is that they're bringing to really sort of make a name for themselves again in the industry. Today's video is brought to you by the new, really super cool Jay's 2 cents melty connector shirt. You know, paying tribute to one of the best designs that's clearly ever existed. And if you don't like the Vaporwave colors, we've got our OG gray and red colors available now. So get yours by following the link in the description below. Nice. Ow, I have a thigh cramp. So one of the best ways to obviously really get to know a case is to do a build in it. And initially I was just gonna kind of do a case overview and talk about the features and stuff. There's obviously some design cues with the FLUX Pro that really seem to carry over from designs they had 20 years ago, but really give it a more modern kind of a flair. But then the more I looked at it, I really decided like it's important to do a build in this because of the fact that there's many things I'm like, oh, but if you do this and you can't do that. And it's like, oh wait, they thought of that. And there's a lot of modularity and adjustability built into this case so that it doesn't have to be like a monster tower on your desk, but it kind of feels like when it comes to the amount of flexibility that's in there. I've also got on this Lazy Susan so I can turn it, but it's not like the feet are kind of dragging a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and just like space this out a little bit here. It's gonna be I think a little easier to get it to turn if I can just sort of get a little bit of extra height. Perfect. Okay, so anyway, the FLUX Pro, what does FLUX stand for? It stands for their flow luxury. And their whole concept with this particular case is to get as much airflow to the graphics card as possible. But how long it takes to design a case, I guarantee Antec was already in the middle of designing this case when the 40 series GPUs launched, and then we realized, oh my God, they're hot as balls. So they went, you know what, let's just sort of take our design cues and our whole design flow, no pun intended, but let's make it really derivative towards cooling the GPU as much as possible. Now let's talk about what you get with the case before you build in it, because obviously when it's built, everything's already in there. So all the fans that you see, minus what's on my AIO up top, come included with the case. So you have 3 of their 140 Tranquil fans in the front, you get a 140 Tranquil fan in the back, and then you get 2 of their 120 reverse flow fans in the mid plate. So these are reverse flow, which means the blade pitch is actually backwards from the way it normally is. That way you don't see the back of the hub and such as it's pulling air into that particular compartment. A little bit of a gripe already right there. And because I have a gripe, I guess I'll take that one away. I don't like that the fans don't match. So I'm gonna start off with that. The Tranquil fans are black and they're a standard flow. The mid-plate fans are gray and reverse blade. So I think it would have been great if we had matching reverse blade fans in the front, since you've got this beautiful mesh panel that's got this kind of a geometric design, but then you also get real wood trim around here. You don't really see the fans to the front or the detail of them. So having some sort of a reverse flow fan would have made the angle that you're looking at them, which is kind of right there how your camera is sort of oriented, it would have been nice to see them match that way. So I just wanted to sort of get that gripe out of the way. I couldn't help but keep thinking that as I was building in it, especially as I'm looking at these the entire time. Every panel on this case is mesh. The bottom, the side, the back on the side right here, as you can see, the mesh flows all the way through. We've got our mesh panel in the front. We've got our mesh panel on the top. And the mesh measures 1.5 millimeters in opening. So if you're wondering how big the holes are, they are 1.5 millimeters thick. So, well, not thick, but open, if you will. And then obviously on the front, we can pull this guy off. And this exposes our mesh front panel with our wood frame. The case comes in 2 colors, white and black. And I think that both look equally good with the wood frame. I've personally never been into the wood aesthetic on cases. I know this has kind of become a trend with a lot of case manufacturers. I personally never really cared for the wood, but this one I think is minimalistic enough to where it's not like in your face with all these wood slats everywhere, but kind of elegant enough to have this sort of a walnut colored wood around the black or the white, which both equally look good. And we'll put pictures of the white up here, to where this feels like something you could have in an office or in a living room or a bedroom, where it feels more like a piece of furniture than it does a computer case. And that's what I think is really nice about this as we're building it. Let's start with the front, because not only is, oh, my PC fell off the money. There we go. So not only, and it's fake money, guys, come on, it's Hollywood money. It even says, if you're wondering, it even says right on it, for motion picture purposes, prop of movie use only, or prop for, do you know how many people actually think this is real? Whatever, okay. Moving forward, not only is it about cooling the GPU, but it's also extremely water cooling friendly. When I talked about my old Antec P182, this is like early 2000s, and we're talking like 2003, I think at this time is when I had the P182. It had some like cage drives right here that had a little ring on there. You could pull the drives out and such. It was not very water cooling friendly. So I had to take a Dremel and modify the crap out of the case to be able to put fans and radiators where I wanted, namely on the exterior on the top of the case. However, every single panel in here has a radiator support along with it. So for instance, on the front right here, you can see we have 3 140 millimeter fans pre-installed. If you look at my top right here, I do have an Arctic 420 on the top. This is the Freezer 3. You can see I can fit a 420 on the top. But you can see that over here in this corner, they sort of overlap. So I would not have been able to put a 420 in the front and a 420 on the top. However, the front fan has 5, or the bracket I should say, has 5 adjustability points. Right now it's from second from the top. We have 3 more mount locations down that we could push this down to allow us, realistically, the best chance possible of being able to mount a 420 on the top and a 420 on the front. Now keep in mind, this radiator on the top is thicker than normal. It is a 38 millimeter thick radiator with 25 millimeter, I think there's a 25 millimeter fans. It might be 27 millimeter fans actually on the top. So this is a thicker situation than we would normally have. I think the only thing that can improve on this is if these were some sort of captive toolless screws, because so far everything else in the case has been pretty much toolless when working with it, especially the exterior panels. So now I can take this out and I can scoot it all the way down to the bottom right there. This whole bracket comes out. So if you want to install the fans and the radiator and everything on this outside of the case, just to make it simpler, you can do that. And then just install it once you have everything mounted up. Now for the super astute in the audience, you know who you are. Raise your hand if you're astute. No, not you, the guy behind you. Yeah, sorry, I wasn't talking to you. So the power supply, you might notice, is turned sideways. This is what they call their I-shift, and you can see it right here. The idea here is the fact that you can even put a 240 millimeter radiator in the bottom. On the bottom of the fan, or the bottom of the case, there is a rail system to be able to install 120 millimeter fans and 140 millimeter fans. However, they only support 240 millimeter radiator on the bottom, mostly because of the width of the radiator and the length of the 280 would be. So the 240 is what they recommend on the bottom. But if your power supply was mounted in a traditional position with the cables going out that way, then the cables would interfere with the radiator. So what they give you pre-installed is this bracket right here, which again, captive thumb screw, which just has, as you can see, a lead cable which plugs into the power supply, and you can see it plugged into the power supply right now. And what I love is the fact that they give you options to have this come out either side. So we've got these notches built into the brackets right here so the cable can pass through these little notches and plug right in. So the only downside for this is if you need to switch off your power supply or whatever, because let's say you're working on something or unplugging cables and whatnot, then you have to take off the tempered glass, you have to lift up the side cover right here for the lower compartment and then flip the switch. So there's a trade-off. You know, things that are really positive like this sometimes come with a drawback, and that's what it is on this one here. Glass has to come off the side cover right here, which is toolless, by the way. It just has these little notches and it's got these little tabs on the bottom that just rest into place. So as soon as you take the glass off, this can pop up. But for like many people, tempered glass can be scary. So the more you handle it, the more scary it can be. Just, I guess, this is only really if you're running a lower radiator in the front. Otherwise, if you turn it the other way, what's down there already pre-installed is this hard drive cage, which I took out just to show you guys that, again, it is a toolless system here. It's got a captive thumb screw, it's got a rail system on the bottom, and it just mounts in that bottom compartment. So you can mount a 3.5-inch drive here, but it also comes, and this is kind of genius, a lot of brands don't do this, it also comes with a 2.5-inch drive sled that mounts to the top of the 3.5-inch drive sled. So not only do you have to make, in other situations or other cases, you have to make a choice if you're gonna mount a 2.5-inch drive or a 3.5-inch drive in the actual movable sled or tray. And it is, as you can see, toolless, by the way, to slide that out. It was smart for them just to utilize extra space to put a 2.5-inch drive right on top of the drive cage. But I took it out because this would have to come out if you're gonna be installing a 240mm lower radiator, but it comes out without tools, which is pretty awesome. Now, if you weren't gonna be doing a lower radiator right here, I would highly recommend putting the power supply in the traditional direction. And then they do obviously give you a bracket for that. And so it just replaces that bracket that has the lead cable on there for your power supply with the standard one. So you can just put a normal power supply to it. So the back panel comes off toolless like this. You can see the mesh on the bottom. So that bottom compartment and those middle fans that are blowing air directly at the GPU are getting fed a massive volume of air right underneath those blades. And it basically pulls it in from the bottom of the case, as well as these vents on the side on the bottom chamber. So although you can mount fans on the bottom, you could remove the bracket. So this is the pre-installed bracket right here that the hard drive cage mounts on. So it basically just slides right on in there. I missed, but basically it slides right on in there, and I can't see, it's dark. This is why I don't like black cases. I can't see, there we go. So it slides right on in there like that, and you can see you still have plenty of room for your power supply cables without hitting the bracket. Now you can slide this bracket left and right if you want, because what's unique about this hard drive bracket is it is screwed down from underneath though. It just mounts to anywhere there's a 120mm fan mount. So you could mount this hard drive bracket if you needed the hard drives and you wanted to run a lower radiator there, you could mount it in this slot or this slot. Not this one here though. I don't know, not entirely sure why. But on the review guide, there's just a big X saying don't put it here, but you can put it here or here. But that's if you have to have the 3.5-inch drive. Now you can fit 4 3.5-inch drives if you need to, because you have one mount here, one mount here. You've got the sleds, which I just showed you, that can mount one there. And my captive screw just came out because I unscrewed it too far. If you take off the additional 2.5-inch drive sled, you have these holes on the top of the cage, which you can mount your hard drive to. And then on the bottom side, you can see you got these big old cutouts right here, so you can actually pass your screwdriver down in there to be able to mount them down. So the fourth 3.5-inch drive would just be mounted to the top of this cage, and it would be down there in the bottom or in the mid plate or something like that. And you can fit 2 2.5-inch SSDs natively without utilizing any of these other parts right here. These both just captive or thumb screw come off and mount to the back. Or any of these drive cages I showed you, as you can see the holes, can also hold 2.5-inch SSDs. So any combination of that is the drives that you can install. Antec, let me just say a big note of appreciation that your factory is not installing captive thumb screws with the strength of the Hulk. Because the point of thumb screws is you use your thumbs to take them off, not a bulldozer or the torque of like a freaking Hellcat, okay? Thank you, just want to point that out. All right, so let's talk about a couple other things here. The top also has a removable bracket. So if you're installing your radiator on the top or your AIO or whatever, you can do it entirely outside of the chassis if you want. It gives you a lot of room to work around with plugging in your EPS cables or any top fan cables or anything like that. Because as you can see, if you have an AIO hanging down like I do, and then you forget to plug that stuff in, they can become a little bit of a pain in the butt. Fortunately, the case is so large in volume, there's still plenty of room to sort of reach up under there and still reach the cables. Fun fact, I installed the EPS cables, my fan cables, and my RGB cable after the 420 AIO was installed, and my big old fingers were able to fit in there without any sort of problem. Speaking of removable brackets, the same thing goes for the middle right here. So these two fans can come off and mount on the bottom if you want. If this look bothers you, you can also take this middle bracket out. There's 2 screws right here. So you can see the entire bracket will just lift out. And if you want direct airflow to the GPU, and it's wired in so I can't really take it out entirely, you can take this out entirely, put these fans on the bottom, and then have it just blow a big volume of air in the top. But now you'll lose this compartmentalized sort of separation between the lower chamber and the upper chamber, which I think people have kind of become accustomed to. But you can also install a radiator right here. You can install a radiator with fans either, well, not really on the bottom because it would interfere with the power supply, but you could do 3 fans and a radiator on top and have that air blowing right to the GPU. If it's a water-cooled GPU, it won't matter if the air is blowing right at it because that heat is being taken away through the radiators. So you could fit a 360 in the top, a 360 in the front, a 360 in the mid, and a 120 in the back if you want to stick with 120 mil fans, or a 420 top, a 360 in the front, 360 mid, and a 140 rear. Or 420 top, a 360 in the front, 240 bottom, 360 mid, 140 rear. If you just really wanted to go overkill and then try and figure out where the heck you're gonna put all that tubing, it can support it. Let's see. Also too, if you want to take these fans out entirely and you're just like, I don't want to run those fans, it does come with 2 extra plates that go in the middle. So you can see how this right here just has this little plate that's mounted down with the mesh. It comes with 2 more of those so that you could just mount those there where those fans are, and then it won't be in the way. It won't look weird with that opening there, so those would just be meshed off right there. Let's see, other stuff that it comes with right here. These are just the IO shields I took out for the IO covers for the GPU. It does come with a little snap kit right here that has extra screws, motherboard standoffs, the motherboard nut to tighten down the standoffs if you need. So spare parts that are commonly lost. And if you want to know more about the wood that was used, they give you a sample and a little info card about the wood. I guessed that it was walnut. I didn't actually pay attention to the kind of wood, and it was. So apparently, Jay knows wood. All right, so what else to talk about here? Oh, the grommets. The grommets on this thing are massive. They're also very floppy. I'm a little concerned about how thin they are, about whether or not if they get caught on something, if they'll tear off. I've had that happen before on cases in the past, but because they're a large opening like this, you can fit many cables through there without too much of an issue. This can also fit an EATX motherboard without any problem. This is a standard motherboard right here. It's an AM5 board. And then if it's a standard ATX, that's fine. If it's an EATX with 90-degree plugs like we have here with the 24 pin, you're good. If it's an EATX motherboard with 180-degree plugs, which means they point straight out, you're gonna have a pretty tight bend to get into the grommet right here, but it is doable. It would actually be recommended, in my opinion, to get a 90-degree 24-pin adapter so it just pushes the cable right through here because it lines up perfectly. Then you won't have as much of an issue. But because the grommets do pretty much run the entire length of the motherboard, minus this little separation right there, then any of those 90-degree or 180-degree headers and such for fans and RGB and USB 3 and all that stuff should line up with these grommets right here. But as you can see, it is an extremely clean build that you can easily fit a lot of stuff in. The one thing I didn't talk about right here is it actually does have a CPU temperature and a GPU temperature readout that exists right here on the side panel. So that side panel does have a little lens cover right here. It's just on the mesh. So when that's installed, it just lines up right over the display. This uses their iUnity software, which has to be downloaded and installed for it to work. So if you turn on the system without that software running or it's in BIOS, you just get 2 white lines and then it kind of turns off. Unfortunately, I didn't do a OS installation on this system because I didn't need to. I just wanted to be able to build in it and see what any of the nuances were like. It does have a USB header that plugs into the motherboard, and that USB header also controls this hub, which is pre-installed right here, and all the fans are pre-wired to it. I love when case manufacturers do that. A lot of case manufacturers will have a hub, but then the fan wires are just left dangling, but everything for the front panels and the USB and all that was already pre-installed and ran down here to where it needs to go, and then you just plug it in. So this does also sync with your motherboard. If you don't want to use, for RGB purposes anyway, the Unity software from Antec, then you can just use whatever your control software is for your motherboard, and then anything plugged into this will give you that RGB control for your motherboard. And you do get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 headers for RGB, as well as 5 headers for fans. 5 of the fans are pre-plugged in. The rear fan was just dangling because there's 6 pre-installed fans and there's only room for 5 on the header. So I just plugged the rear fan into one of the chassis headers on the motherboard and everything was good to go. Very, very easy to install in. This would be an extremely user-friendly case. Okay, now let's talk about price, because when you get this kind of design, like tooling something like this is not cheap. I mean, all these little things that are that are adjustable, even these stupid little pegs that are on the front to be able to mount the brackets and stuff to. Every little thing like that costs additional to tool. You would think that that stuff would really start to add up and make this a very expensive chassis. I'm very pleased to be able to say that the black is $179. There are cases that I first reviewed when I started this channel 12 years ago that were more expensive than that and didn't have half the design that this case does. And the white is $184. So they have to make up for some of the low margins you get on white. For every white case that sells, most brands will sell like 10 black cases. So it's low volume, which means it costs more to produce because you're not ordering as many as a quantity, or MOQ, right? Or minimum order quantities or qualities. Anyway, the price I think is very, very, very competitive. I can think of cases that are more expensive that are not this pleasant to build in. I mean, usually any of the cases that involve wood immediately become more expensive because they have to make sure that the wood meets the aesthetic they're looking for. And I don't just mean like what kind of wood. I mean, to source wood and get it without knots and blemishes and cracks and defects in there, and then to go through the process of sealing it. Because my biggest concern with cases with wood is if you live in a very humid environment, is it gonna start to warp or curl up on you? But the wood has been moisture treated and is sealed, so you're not gonna get that. So it even has a nice kind of a lacquer finish on there, which is nice and smooth. It gives it sort of a satin finish, but also has a little bit of wood shine to it. So when the light hits it, you see all the grain, it just pops out and has depth. And I can see why people are really falling in love with wood design cues on cases now, because it doesn't feel adolescent. It doesn't feel juvenile. It feels like a piece of furniture in your room. It doesn't stand out with blinking RGB lights everywhere and say, hey, look at me. Because you might have noticed this entire case lacks any sort of RGB. It has the controller. It gives you options to plug stuff into it to make your life easier if you want to use RGB, but nothing on this case illuminates at all, with the exception of the display panel down here for your GPU and CPU temperatures. The only RGB that lights at all in this case is the RGB fans that are on the Arctic cover right here for the AIO, and the fans that are installed on the Arctic cooler already, because that's what I put in there. Otherwise, this is like the perfect case for the person that's like, look, my balls dropped 30 years ago. I don't care about RGB. I care about just being clean and not in your face or just screaming for attention. And that's exactly what this gives you. I feel like this is the kind of case that if I had it sitting on my desk at work, I would start to have wood tones and stuff to sort of match this. In fact, these are like the exact same color and tone as my edifiers that are on my desk over there right now. I wonder if maybe a case changes in my future. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching today's video. And of course, a huge thanks to Antec. Antec is an OG. They've been around for decades, and they were really non-existent there for quite a while in the sense that they weren't really pushing their name like they could have. And I think a lot of other brands got real comfortable with kind of sliding into the space and showing some designs, and Antec's bringing it back old school, but with modern flair. It's the Antec I remember being excited about when I had my P182, or even my Antec 900 with having the 200mm fans all over it. I'm really happy to see Antec really making a name for themselves here. The C8 was super popular, and then now the Flux Pro, I think, and the whole Flux lineup of cases, I think, are gonna be extremely popular given their price to performance ratios. However, you guys are the consumers, and it's your money that talks. Not mine, not my video, it's your money. So sound off in the comments below how you feel about the price point at $179 for black, and do you think that the feature set for that price is a good value? For fun fact, I know I can't demonstrate airflow for you guys, and I don't have a chamber that can do that. I do have the smoke test, but I'm gonna tell you right now, when it's running, there's so much airflow, the grommets start flapping. It's insane how much airflow there is through this case. And that's because of the 1.5mm porosity in the, 1.5mm holes in the fine mesh that is doing a good job at blocking dust, but not blocking airflow. All right, guys, sound off down below. And as always, we'll see you in the next one.